Okay. Hi, I'm Simon Crosier, but most importantly, I'm Simon's mom. My husband Scott and I were married in 2002. Our first child, Samuel, was born in 2003. Our second child, Sean, was born in 2004. After Sean, my husband and I had then lost 6 children to miscarriage. The doctors had told us that we just want a boy. Look, you have 2 healthy boys, Samuel and Sean. So we had continued trying, and we did get pregnant again with Simon. One, we were elated, we were filled with absolute joy to find out that we were expecting again. But at the same time, always in the back of our mind, are we gonna lose this child too? So at the 20-week ultrasound, they found markers for trisomy 18. They noticed that our son had a cleft lip, and also he had clenched fists. And these were signs of a genetic abnormality. They started pressuring us to terminate and to do further testing. And we just looked at them and said, you know, we feel incredibly blessed that we're expecting again. And we wouldn't even want to risk a chance that we would miscarry this child too. We just knew, we were like, we're not going down this road. We're going to enjoy this pregnancy. We don't know if there's going to be any other pregnancies after that, so we want this pregnancy to be special. At one of the ultrasounds, we were cornered in the doorway by the sonographer and the ultrasound doctor, and we told them we wouldn't terminate no matter what our son has. We're going to love our child, cleft lip and all. And they told us that there are parents that just terminate for cleft lips. And at that point, we learned what kind of a world we're really living in here. But the pressure continued throughout the pregnancy. And this doctor, after hearing Simon's strong heartbeat, said to me, well, you know, I still think that there are problems, and you need to talk to the grief nurse to talk about funerals. My son is alive, he is born, he is living, and they were already trying to get us to start a funeral, or plan a funeral. And I looked at him and I said, no, we're planning for Simon's life. So of course, you know, we leaned on our faith, obviously, and we just kept on going. And I'm not gonna lie, yes, I mean, I was extremely anxious throughout the whole pregnancy, but we still had hope. And we had hope that our son was going to make it here. And my only prayer was, dear Lord, just let me hold this child in my arms. After miscarrying so many children, I just wanted to hold my baby. On September 7th, at 5:40 p.m. is when Simon was born. For us, it was good that he didn't have that prenatal diagnosis, because my prayer of holding him in my arms, I don't know, because he started having D-cells with his heart while he was, after being induced while we were in labor. And the nurse said, do you want me to call the doctor? And I said yes, because we already had discussions. We don't want Simon to struggle whatsoever. I'd like an emergency C-section. So the doctor comes in. First thing he says, now you know there's problems. I believe that there's problems, or we've had problems. I'm like, I don't care. Get my son out. So that's when he was born, September. After that, they took Simon to the NICU and asked my husband Scott to step outside as they were examining our child. And the doctor came out and he said, Scott, you know we have concerns. And all my husband could say was, I know, but we have hope and we have faith. We're like, well, great, do whatever you can for our child. We want Simon, no matter what he has, you know, heart defects, bilateral cleft lip, it doesn't matter. Just help him. It was the third day of life that the neonatologist walked in, and my husband and I were sitting in Simon's small little private NICU room. And she walked in and she said, we have the results. Simon has full trisomy 18. She looked at my husband and I, and she said, very sincerely, but she said, I'm sorry. And she walked out of the room. At that point, I noticed things were changing. Before, it was all the medical terminology, and you know, they're starting him on a heart medicine, and they're doing everything for him. He even was on a CPAP, and he had all these things. He had a heart monitor during delivery. But then after that, it was different. We started hearing the words, your child is now incompatible with life. Incompatible with life. And he's living, he's breathing. And I asked, well, what does this mean now? Well, incompatible with life, failure to thrive, he's just gonna die. So basically, what's the point of doing anything for him? And I looked at them and I thought, how harsh, how dehumanizing to have your child called incompatible with life. That's saying not for your child. And so we went on, and we noticed that just so many things changed. I noticed his breathing wasn't as good, and I said, hey, should we do that CPAP again that he was on before they knew he had the label? Oh no, that won't help him. That would be uncomfortable for him. And we were asking for what other options, you know, what can we do? And they were just, we don't know. Why is Simon doing this? We don't know. Simon was having some apnea. Why is that? We don't know. There was no, we were not given the options or even the challenges that we were going to face. At one point, my husband even said to them, you guys are like the weathermen. You just don't know. You don't have any answers for us. So even if they didn't know, there was no research, they never got back to us. After that diagnosis, I had noticed they were using a syringe, or just a little, like a squeezer type of syringe, and they would put these drops in our child's mouth, in Simon's mouth. And I asked him, like, what is that? Oh, it's sucrose. Like, sucrose. It's sugar water. And so why you give him? Why are you giving him that? Well, it's good to use when he would fuss. I said, okay. And I said, well, wait a minute. I'm pumping breast milk. What if we used my breast milk in a syringe and gave that to him? And is there any way I can start nursing now or bottle feeding? So she got the approval from the doctor to have him get my breast milk through the NG tube. Every day was a battle. You know, one doctor turned off Simon's heart monitor when I was down the hall having lunch with another NICU mom. Walking back, his monitor's off, and I walk in his room and I thought my son was dead because he was having apnea, so I thought he just did not look right. The monitor's off, it's quiet as can be. And the other nurse is like, yeah, Dr. So-and-so turned it off. I said, you get him in here and I want to talk to him now. And at that point, I started noticing that they weren't involving us in these decisions. They had their mind made up about Simon. They were giving us all the negativity about this is, you know, what happens to these kids. These kids don't live long. And it was all about the diagnosis, the label. And so when this nurse told me which doctor did it, I confronted him and I said, I never gave you permission to turn my son's monitor off. Do you realize that is telling us what his lifeline is? It tells us his oxygen saturation levels. It can tell you when your child is having apnea. It tells the heart rate. Why wouldn't I want to know that information? He said, well, I thought it would be nice to turn it off so you could just enjoy Simon. And I looked at him and I thought, wait a minute, this is not your son. This is my son. And you're trying to get me to buy into your, oh, this would be nicer. This would be, you know, it would be much more calming to not hear any beeps. And I said, no, we want that monitor. We're paying to be in this hospital. We have insurance. You know, leave it on. And he looked at me and he actually called me mean. I just felt like they were treating him as not a person, an object. They were just looking at that label and not who Simon was. From one doctor in particular, there were so many times that he would say, oh, not for Simon. The cardiologist was, you know, I wouldn't say advocating for heart surgery, but he gave us the options. He said, yes, there is a doctor here in the area that would be willing to intervene. And it was the night before we were going to get transferred to this other hospital that they had another neonatologist come in, and she looked at us and she said, you know, if this was my child, I wouldn't do that. And so we told her, we said, okay, well, we're going to wait till Simon gets bigger. And went through that whole time, each time thinking his feedings were increasing. And it was at the end of his life that I realized something was just not right. Simon continued to struggle even worse with his breathing, and the nurse that was on duty at the time, I remember her pointing out, look, he's retracting. And I thought, okay, if he's retracting, you know, I didn't go to medical school. Well, here I'm trying to go back to the CPAP. Should we do the CPAP again? Can we help him? And I don't know, and this was one of his special nurses too, and I don't know if she was trying to tell me something or what, but she was pointing it out, and I asked, what else can we do? So she would talk to the doctors. There's nothing else that we can do. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. You know, why aren't they helping my son that's retracting? So the breathing got worse and worse, and they kind of told us, well, he's on all the oxygen he can have, and they started warning us, saying, this is the end. And that doctor who turned off the monitor kept saying, yes, maybe it's his time to go to heaven now. And he kept using those words, and I'm thinking, use your God-given talent as a physician and leave the rest in God's hands. It didn't seem like people were on the same page. You know, some of the nurses and the doctors, and the nurses would try to do things for Simon, but then things wouldn't happen. And so on December 3rd at 10:45 a.m., Simon died. And we like to say, yes, he left this world for his eternal home. And we know we're going to see our son again. But I'll never forget my husband and I in that NICU room, watching that monitor and seeing those numbers plummet and asking again, what can be done? And we're told nothing. And then looking back, knowing what I know now, I know why they did nothing. He had a DNR in his chart, a do not resuscitate. We never put or signed a DNR. So even though his numbers were plummeting and going down, and our son was dying because of that DNR, they did nothing. So that's why my husband and I stood in that room, and at that moment, we just felt like, wait a minute, this is what we paid these so-called experts to, they didn't do anything? Was there really not anything to do for a child? If this was any other child, it would have been an ER moment. People running down the NICU halls to save my child. So here's Simon struggling to breathe, and nobody's helping him. And that's when I started realizing something was just not right here. Another reason why they didn't do anything, because with the futility policy, any attending physician can determine the outcome of your child. To me, I look at that as they can determine the value of your child. We would have never have stayed there if we would have, one, known that they had a futility policy, two, that something like this was going to happen, and three, constantly, we don't know, we don't know. I mean, they never gave us any kind of answers. But we were looking for answers and we weren't getting them. And the other thing that was completely heartbreaking was when I looked through Simon's records, not only did I find the DNR, this is the worst part, was the comfort feeds. If you look up a definition of comfort feeds, it means the least amount of food possible. It's not for nourishment. So how stupid I felt when I thought they were increasing his NG tube each time. They were giving my son the least amount of food as possible. And they were okay with that, knowing what they were doing. So if you go back to that DNR, and if my son wouldn't have stopped breathing, he would have been starved to death. We communicated very clearly. My words were, we want Simon's special needs and all. And my husband's words, we are not here to expedite his demise. It seemed like every turn we took, they tried to take us a different way. Not only did I feel like my rights were violated, my rights were taken away, but my son is no longer here and I cannot bring my son back. But what I can do is I can make sure and try to help that this never happens to another child again.